So here we have Voyager's Delta Flyer, which I've had in a box for a little while now, and so I've been quite keen to get this out of its box and onto my shelves, alongside the Defiant and the Runabout, because I figured the nearest thing to a Runabout Voyager ever gets is this Delta Flyer. So without further ado, I shall unbox her and we shall have a look. If you're unfamiliar, there is a sort of a standing joke, I think it's fair to say, that Voyager, for all of its limited resources, had a near infinite supply, seemingly, of shuttlecraft, which were, destroyed or damaged or whatever, and then sort of magically replaced on a regular basis. And it is conceivable that, given enough raw materials, Voyager could, of course, replicate various component pieces and then assemble a shuttlecraft to replace the ones lost. But the idea behind the Delta Flyer was that it would accommodate Borg components after they rescued 7 of 9, and so it would become a more functional, operational sort of mini starship in a sense, rather than just being a common old garden shuttlecraft. And I think it was destroyed on a couple of occasions, possibly, and then they just recreated it from scratch again, as you would do, because they could just replicate it again, in effect, albeit piece by piece. So let's have a look at that. It also, of course, ooh, that's nice. I have had a comment of late that some of these ships that I've been looking at have been quite plasticky, but that is a hell of a weight for just a plastic ship. And the reason is, of course, it's not entirely plastic. This is all cold to the touch, so I would say that a good portion of this, of the wings certainly, I think it changes into plastic here, interestingly, but the wings are solid metal. So that gives it a lot of weight, actually, more so than I was anticipating, just having handled the box, actually. So you can see it's a rather clever shape, because its nacelles aren't as obvious as they are on a lot of standard type Federation shuttles. They're far more inbuilt. I mean, they are still outside of the the main hull of the ship, so it's not quite as integrated as the Defiant nacelles, for example. But they're also considerably more sort of hidden in here than a standard warp nacelle would be. And it had various Borg enhancements, but of course the irony was that because Tom Paris had a hand in designing it, the control system was actually hilariously old school, because he made it look like a bloody Captain Proton starship in a sort of Flash Gordon style. So he had proper levers and knobs and stuff to actually control his impulse engines and all that sort of good stuff. So quite entertaining in that sense, I suppose, and a sort of a break from the norm. It had the usual sort of science stations, mind you. It had, I'm not even sure, I mean, I think it had a separate section, kind of an aft compartment down here, because in the episode where they try and bring Voyager back after a failed transwarp experiment, we actually see them go into a sort of separate, almost like a science section, kind of back here and down, maybe down below a bit. So it may actually have a couple of decks. So it is genuinely quite a big ship. It is the Voyager equivalent of a Runabout class vessel. But fortunately, Voyager did have quite a substantial shuttle bay, so it was workable for them to have this kept on board Voyager for the majority of the time. I'm just looking to see if it's actually got a... No, there's no... I'm not sure that... Well, not, of course, it has an official NCC number, because I guess with it being out in the Delta Quadrant, it wouldn't necessarily have a chance to get a... that's possibly the widest stand I've ever seen for an Eaglemoss model to date. So I'm not sure, as I say, I'm not really sure it could actually have an NCC registry as such, given where it was. But there is quite a long registry number on it. And and if I'm completely honest, I couldn't tell you if that's Voyager's or if it is a separate one. Let me just have a quick look for you, because I bet it's Voyager's NCC is 74656, which would make sense. So that is Voyager's registry number there. So rather than giving it its own registry number, they've obviously given it Voyager's for identification purposes. Should anyone in the Delta Quadrant actually care, of course. So there we go. It's an incredibly wide stand, but it does sit on it very happily. I can't say that I felt particularly strongly about the Delta Flyer in terms of me getting it for my collection, but as I say, it just made sense on my sort of post Next Generation shelf to have the Defiant and a Runabout and Voyager and the Delta Flyer as the two sort of hero class ships, if you like, that we frequently see in those series. And the Delta Flyer did make a lot of sense because it meant that you could have another secondary starship going off to do something else in the course of an episode, rather than having to send the entirety of Voyager off to an asteroid belt, for example, which obviously it wouldn't make sense for Voyager to go into. Absolutely logical. I think actually, I'm trying to think that it was originally created because they wanted to investigate something in a gas giant. I'm really dredging the memory banks here because I haven't read up on this, but I'm pretty sure that they needed something that was tougher than a traditional shuttle. So Harry and Tom were either they came up with the idea or they tasked themselves or were tasked to create an ancillary vessel that was stronger than the average shuttlecraft, and so the Delta Flyer was born, and on occasionally reborn as needed to try and keep that sort of functionality alive. And as I say, it was very unique in the fact that it incorporated some Borg technology to try and toughen it up, and it did actually get a transwarp. What do they call them? Coil? Is it a transwarp coil that the Borg used to get into transwarp tunnels? And I think they used that for a rescue at one point, and it kind of burnt out. But it basically was a decent facsimile of a small Borg ship at one point, in terms of its speed and so on. So it was a clever way to add to the abilities of Voyager without it having significant sort of industrial capacity in and of itself. And you can imagine that Borg technology would be well suited to augmenting a Starfleet shuttle like this. So so that'll fit rather nicely on the shelf. It's arguably actually not as big as the DS9 Runabout model was, because I chuckled when I saw that, because it's probably bigger than the Defiant, which is impressive, but of course it's completely out of scale, and this will be completely out of scale with the Voyager, I'm sure. But in terms of a model to look at on the shelf, it's I think it's certainly right up there with some of the strongest ones I've seen from them, and it's nice that it's a sort of a solid shape. So we don't have any, there are no pylons here, and no sort of issues with any of that. It's a solid ship, which I think is quite sensible, because it just adds a certain amount of extra durability. I guess it means that your shield bubble and everything else can be sort of tighter into the ship as a result. So it's a nice shuttle to look at, if you can still call it a shuttle, and it does sort of end the debate about the sheer number of shuttles that Voyager was able to churn out with supposedly limited materials. But they had to stretch it at some point, because otherwise the show would just have been about Voyager trying to find new stuff every episode, which would have got old pretty quickly. So as with the Borg, they adapted. So that is the Delta Flyer from Voyager. It's a useful reminder of which quadrant they were in as well. And with that, I shall leave you and jump to an entirely different series to round off the models that I still had left to open. and I will now have to debate whether or not I go for the current sort of Black Friday Cyber Week discount to get myself a couple of ships that I'm still missing, which are very, very elusive, which is annoying, and also they're never in the offers. So I may have to. There's a 25% offer off at the moment if you're watching this in about a week or so when I upload it, and it will get you a quarter off if you spend over a certain amount. But those sorts of offers are quite handy because it means you don't have to buy. You don't have to wait for a specific offer on a specific ship. You can just pre-order stuff hopefully, and get that discount off it. And it's 25%. It's pretty strong. Sometimes you get stuff half price off. More often than maybe you get a third off. 25% isn't too bad. So I may go for it just because I'm concerned about the stock of this particular item I'm after, he says mysteriously. So yeah, so that's the Delta Flyer, and I'll leave you there and have a look at my next one. Cheers for now.